Welcome to Real Estate and Taxes with Lakshay. I will be helping you minimize your taxes. Thank you very much for joining in on my Tuesday session on real estate and taxes. My name is Lakshay. Today, we're going to be talking about, is it profitable to buy a cannabis store in Canada? So without further ado, let's get started. Today's agenda, we're going to focus on some of the background and history, the initial funds required to operate a successful cannabis store, three important things to consider before buying your own store, a live example of income and expenses of a business that is already running as a cannabis store, and then we're going to finally conclude. What is the background and history? The government of Canada legalized cannabis stores in 2018. Before that, there was not much going on in terms of cannabis. Most of it was regulated by the black market. So, government thought, why not tax the cannabis industry and recover some of the deficits in their budgets. So after 2018, you can now possess up to 30 grams of legally produced cannabis, and adults are also allowed to grow 4 cannabis plants per household. So that's a very big change, because otherwise all of the money was being regulated by the black market, and it's billions of dollars of missed tax revenue that the government was facing with. In Ontario, taking a step back, you can get authorization in all over Canada. It's regulated and it's approved at a federal level. But because I'm in Ontario, I'm going to be talking about rules and regulations required to open it in Ontario. And what are the licensing costs? It might be higher or lower depending on where you are situated, which province of Canada you're in. So keep that in mind. I'm going to be talking today of Ontario only. So let's assume you wanted to open a cannabis store in Ontario. You're going to have to get, first of all, a few licenses. These licenses are related to the retail operating license as an individual. Then we have the basic retail store authorization, and also followed by a store manager license. So all of these three are required to operate a successful cannabis store. In terms of the licensing fees, it could be a little bit hefty when it comes to initial funds, which we're going to be talking about at a later stage as well. But just to give you a glimpse, first license is costing $6,000, which is the retail operating license at an individual level. The second license is retail store authorization, which is costing another $4,000. So $10,000 right off the bat. All right, so now let's look at the requirements to be an owner of these cannabis stores. In order to open one, of course, you need to be over the age of 19. That's a no-brainer. You also need to get a police clearance certificate, because that's going to determine that if AGCO, which is the Alcohol Gaming and Licensing Commission, they will actually allow you to get the license or not. Followed by, you're gonna have to also make sure that your tax returns are not outstanding. You cannot have an outstanding tax return before opening a cannabis store. Last but not the least, you need a CanSell certification. Now let's look at my favorite part, which is the numbers. Initial funds required to operate a successful cannabis store could be $80,000 to $100,000 for initial inventory order. What does initial inventory mean? You basically need to contact the OCS, which will basically regulate, which is basically the Ontario licensed producer of cannabis. So in order for any of the retail owners to buy cannabis to resell at their stores, you would basically need to get inventory, which is costing you roughly $80,000 to $100,000. The second, which we talked about, the retail operating license, retail store license, as well as the store manager's license. This could typically cost between $10,000 to $12,000. So again, very big commitment when it comes to initial startup costs. You would minimum also need 2 employees to operate a successful cannabis store. One could be someone at the door who's checking the person's ID card before they're entering the store, and the second one could be inside the store, who are typically just working towards checking the client out. whatever they are buying, you just basically bring it from the back and provide it to the customer. So one at the entrance, another one inside the store. Minimum 2 employees needed. You also need 6 months of rent. I will talk about this a little bit later because the next slide will give you a better idea, but 6 months of rent is definitely part of the initial funds that you would need in order to run a successful license cannabis store. Another $50,000 to $100,000 in leasehold improvements. Why do I say such a high leasehold improvement cost? Well, there are some government requirements where you need to install a cage at the back of the store, which is technically for safety purposes electrocuted. So you need to make sure the vault is there, the cage is there, there's cameras, security system, POS terminals. All of these need to be very well installed because they go through a rigorous inspection process by the cannabis store license, basically the AGCO. So they will come and inspect your store. So $50,000 to $100,000 is definitely, you need to make sure that all of the product that is being kept it is kept in a very safe manner, so it doesn't get stolen or nothing bad happens basically. Now let's look at the 3 important considerations before opening a cannabis store. Number 1 is location. Just like any real estate things that we have talked about, whether it be opening Airbnb business, whether it be opening a convenience store, or whether it be opening a cannabis store, you need to follow certain rules and protocols. In this scenario, you need to make sure if you are operating a cannabis store, it needs to be away from the schools. It needs to be away from at least 300 meters from schools in order to operate a retail cannabis store. Number 2 is acquiring the licenses. There's a few licenses that you need to acquire on the way, but you need to make sure that they get applied in the right sequence. For the retail operator's license, which is the very first license, which is going to cost you roughly $6,000, you technically don't need to finalize the location until then. When you open you go to the second phase, which is the retail store authorization license, you need to sign up for a lease. So at that time, they can take roughly 6 months for you to, for them to come and check that you are okay to give you a green signal to start operating your business. But for those 6 months, you cannot sell and you have to start paying or sign up for a lease. So 6 months worth of additional rent goes out of your pocket whenever you're opening this business. So keep that in mind. The third is the criminal record check for your store manager, which is the cannabis retail license manager. This could be, it's again, small piece of the puzzle, $1,000 only, but $6,000 for ROL, RSA cost $4,000, $1,000 for RSM, roughly $10,000 to $11,000 goes towards the licenses. And if they're not, applied it in the right sequence, you could be paying rent and it could be costing you more and more money and you might not even be able to operate. So make sure to, work with the right consultant before opening your cannabis retail store. Last but not the least, third one that I wanted to mention is a proper security plan as well as trained staff. One of the biggest things that I've noticed with the cannabis retail store is the security. You need to invest top dollars in the security to install a vault, to install cameras, to make sure that nothing fishy is happening, because there is government audits on a weekly basis of your inventory. So if something gets stolen and you don't have the right you don't have the right documentation, you don't have the right procedures in place in order to protect your inventory, you're going to be in big trouble. So make sure you have the right team that you're working with, as well as trained staff, which has no convictions. Police clearance certificate needs to be looked at right off the bat. Very important aspect again. Now let's look at some of the day-to-day expenses. From the day-to-day expenses, I've figured out some of the one-time expenses that you need to do. This includes the first $80,000 of inventory. The second is the retail operator license for $6,000. The retail store license, which is store authorization for $4,000. The cancel certification for $90, the police clearance certificate for I think another $100, and then the retail store manager license, which is the another $1,000. All of these are one time, but you definitely need to know all of these upfront before getting into a business like this. And last but not the least, 50,000 to going towards the leasehold improvement. 50 to 75 to 100,000. It can really depends on the size of the store. So if you ask me, the initial setup cost could roughly be $150 to $180,000 in one-time expenses. Now let's look at the month-to-month cost. The month-to-month cost would include something like you need every week you need to order the inventory with OCS. So that's going to cost you another $20,000. I've calculated roughly 2.5-3 employees worth of salary, which is another $10,000. The monthly rent of $3,000. Really, it could be very higher amount based on where the location is. Right? I've picked up a rural area, so it's only $3,000. $1,200 marketing cost. Some other miscellaneous costs related to software, website, vehicle, utilities, telephone, POS fees. Roughly working out to $37,900. If you ask me, and if you include the amortization of the costs on the previous slide, which included roughly another $150,000, this can easily go towards, I would say, $37,000 to $50,000. Is the ballpark is the cost of maintaining a retail cannabis store on a month-to-month basis. Revenue side, I have noticed it really depends on where your location is. If you are in a good location, like a decent location like a Niagara Falls location, your weekly sales roughly earning about $30,000. If you times that by 52 weeks, you're going to work out to $1.5 million of revenue, which is again, I think, a very promising number. Typically, the profit margin should be around 30%, but because of a lot of competition, people are squeezing down on their net profit margin, and they have started to offer incentives, gifts, and things like that to attract more clientele to their store. That's why the profit margin has dropped from 30% to roughly closer to 15 to 18%. So even if I do 15% of $1.5 million in sale, the net profit is $300,000. Now, what do you think? Is it making a lot more sense now? With other businesses, you might not be walking away with $100,000 in net profit because the sale number is just not there to support it. But with a cannabis store, you can, the lowest I've seen a cannabis store walk away with is, let's say, $225,000. Never lower than that. So I think it does have high initial cost, but the walk away, the net profit is definitely better than doing a $100,000 job. Because if you ask me personally, I try to compare myself with, okay, if I were to do a job, am I just buying myself a job? But then, $300,000 walk away, you're technically in one of the, top 5% earners when it comes to salaries. So definitely $300,000 is a good walk away profit. So now let's look at my conclusion. It might be a little bit different than yours, but definitely, I wanted to shed some light on cannabis stores. Location matters a lot. If you are in Niagara Falls versus Toronto, Niagara Falls, your profit margin might be a little bit higher, whereas Toronto, which is already densely populated and actually overpopulated, so your profit margin might be lower because every single red light will have one store. Even in Mississauga, imagine having imagine having to compete against 36 stores. Your profit margin is going to be a lot lower. If you look at the population size, depending on where you want to open, I suggest going to a far place, like a rural place, right, which nobody has heard of, which must have minimum $5,000 population for you to break even. I know someone opened a store where the population was only 1,200 people. Turns out when they visited and opened, there wasn't enough population to support your business. So again, some things to think about. I mentioned that the profit margin was very low, 15 to 30% on all the inventory that they're selling. how can you increase the profits? I've noticed that some of the smoking accessories, bongs, vapes, and other things have a higher profit margin. So those things are not rationed by the government on a weekly inventory audit. So maybe you can look at ways of increasing this side of the game where the profit margin might be 100%, 50%, or a lot higher. There's a lot of returns and refunds in this kind of business, because the weed might get moldy or some sort of problems. This can be adjusted against OCS, which is the government body that supplies you with the inventory. So again, you're not out of pocket for any of the damaged inventory. If you ask me, is it better than leaving a 100K job? I say yes. Why? Because this even the the most least performing cannabis store you would still walk away with 200K. So I highly recommend looking into a direction where if you have the sufficient funds to support it, I highly recommend going in that direction. What I have noticed in the past is people who are doing one location are not that profitable, but when you do multiple locations in rural areas, those are the people who have actually come out as a winner in this kind of business. Again, one of the issues that I have talked to various cannabis store owners is the staffing issues. The turnover in the rural areas is very high, so be careful. You might have to be available on at least a part-time basis at the bare minimum in the beginning, to make sure that your cannabis store is operating at a right productivity and efficiency level. So that kind of sums up my conclusion on cannabis stores for today. Thank you very much for joining in.